paramedic was still talking when I heard my mother's voice in the background. "Tell her we're busy. Maria's having a meltdown." I was lying on the shoulder of the highway, my hazards blinking somewhere behind me, gravel pressing into the back of my skull. The paramedic, a young guy, maybe 25, had my phone on speaker because my left hand wouldn't close properly around it. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know what to do with what he'd just heard. "Ma'am," he said into the phone, "your daughter's been in a collision on the 401. She needs someone at St. Mike's." My mother's voice came back, clipped and annoyed. "How long will she be there?" "We're not sure yet. There may be a head injury." Silence. Then, "Is she dying?" The paramedic looked at me. I looked at the sky. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November. The kind of gray that sits on Toronto like a wet blanket. Not at this time, but then it can wait. Maria just got a ticket from a photo radar camera, and she's inconsolable. It's $400 and something. Do you know how upsetting that is? He hung up the phone for me. I think he could tell I didn't want to do it myself. I should back up. My name is Sabine. I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse, not a surgeon. Not a doctor, just a nurse who works 12-hour shifts in the cardiac unit at a downtown Toronto hospital and comes home smelling like hand sanitizer and exhaustion. I've been doing this for 7 years. I moved out of my parents' house in Mississauga when I was 22, the same week I started my first placement, and I never really moved back. But I never really left either. That's the problem. My sister Maria is 27. She works part-time at a spa. She is, according to every family gathering I've ever attended, the sensitive one. Which in our family means the one who cries until she gets what she wants and everyone else adjusts accordingly. I am the responsible one, which means I pay. Not metaphorically, literally, I pay. When my parents' furnace died 2 winters ago, I covered $3,200 for the replacement because my father said he didn't have it, and my mother said the cold was affecting Maria's skin. When Maria got her wisdom teeth out and her dental plan didn't cover everything, I sent $800. When my parents renewed their car insurance and the premium went up, my mother called me with the difference like I was a billing department. I never said no. Not once. My husband Drew, we've been together 6 years, married for 2, used to ask me about it. Not in a combative way. Just quietly, usually when we were doing the dishes or getting into bed. One daughter is a keep sending it. And I would say something like, because they need it, or because it's easier, or because if I don't, Maria will, and she can't afford it. He'd nod. He never pushed, he just watched. Looking back, I think he was waiting for me to figure it out on my own. The accident wasn't dramatic, as accidents go. I was driving home after a 12-hour night shift. I'd slept 3 hours before going in. The car in front of me stopped suddenly for a bird, an actual bird, someone told me later at the scene. And I rear-ended it going maybe 40 kilometers an hour. My airbag deployed. I hit my head on the side window. The other driver was fine. I was not fine, but I was conscious and talking, which in emergency medicine means you're doing okay, relatively speaking. The paramedics put me in a neck brace as a precaution. My head was pounding in a way I recognized from nursing school as a flag. I told them this. I said, "I'm a cardiac nurse. I think you should know my headache is an 8 out of 10, and I have some visual disturbance in my left eye." They took that seriously. They loaded me up. In the ambulance, one of them, a woman named Tricia, who reminded me of a preceptor I'd had in second year, held my hand and called Drew. He answered on the second ring. "I'm already in the car," he said. He worked from home that day. He was at St. Mike's before I even got out of triage. My parents arrived 3 hours and 40 minutes later. I know the exact time because Drew had been tracking it. Not to be petty. That's not who he is, but because by that point he'd called them 4 times. The first call was from the ambulance. The second was from the waiting room. The third was after I'd been moved to a room and they'd ordered a CT. The fourth was after the CT came back showing a small subdural bleed and the neurology team was discussing what to do next. My father picked up on the fourth call. Drew explained the situation: subdural hematoma, monitoring required, possible intervention if it didn't resolve. My father said, "Okay, we're finishing dinner and then we're coming." They were finishing dinner? Drew didn't tell me that until later. At the time, he just sat next to my bed and held my hand and said, "They're on their way." He has this quality, Drew does, where he can be furious and completely calm at the same time. Like the anger is there, you can feel it if you know him, but it doesn't leak. He just gets very still. He was very still that evening. The neurology resident who came to talk to me was probably my age. She had short hair and tired eyes, and she explained, carefully, that the bleed was small, but in a location they wanted to watch closely. She said if I consented, they'd like to keep me for at least 48 hours of observation. If anything changed, pressure, symptoms, confusion, they'd escalate. I consented. I signed my own forms. I am an adult. I am a healthcare worker. I understood what she was telling me and I told her yes, monitor me, do what you need to do. Drew was there when I signed. He held the clipboard. When my parents walked into my room at 8:37 that evening, the first thing my father said was, "You look fine." I had a line in my arm, a blood pressure cuff cycling every 15 minutes, and a headache that made the overhead light feel like someone was pressing a thumb behind my eye. But, okay. Fine. My mother went to sit in the chair on the other side of the bed, Drew's chair, where Drew had been sitting for 4 hours, and Drew stood up to let her take it without being asked. I watched him walk to the window, still, calm, furious. "One daughter is a doctor," my mother said. I told her. She made a sound like she was only half listening and then said, "Maria is beside herself. This has been a very stressful day for her." I didn't say anything. $17, my father said. The camera got her on the gardener. She wasn't even going that fast. She was crying for 2 hours, my mother added. You know how she gets. I looked at Drew. He was looking out the window at the parking garage across the street. "I have a bleed in my brain," I said, not dramatically, just as a fact. I know, my mother said. "But you said they're just watching it." "Yes." "So it's not that serious?" I closed my eyes. The light was too much. My parents stayed for maybe 45 minutes. They ate the crackers from my tray because they'd rushed through dinner and were still hungry. My father complained about the parking. It was $22 for the evening rate, which he mentioned twice. When they left, my mother squeezed my hand and said, "Feel better, sweetheart. Maria says hi." Maria didn't come. In the 2 days I was in hospital, Maria texted me once. It said, "Hope we're okay. Crazy day for me too. Laval." Drew slept in the chair, both nights. He brought me my favorite tea from the Tim Hortons in the lobby and didn't say a single word about the parking. My colleagues from the cardiac unit sent a group card. My charge nurse, a woman named Bev, who I've worked with for 5 years, came by on her lunch break the second day and sat with me for 20 minutes. She brought me a cheese croissant from the bakery 2 blocks from the hospital because she remembered I'd mentioned it once, 6 months ago. My own sister sent a laughing emoji. Here's what I want you to understand about what happened next. It didn't come from spite. I'm not a spiteful person. Drew isn't either. What happened came from something quieter and more final than spite. It came from the moment when a thing you've been telling yourself finally stops being believable. I was discharged on a Thursday afternoon. The bleed had stabilized, the headaches were reducing, and I was sent home with instructions to rest, avoid screens, and return immediately if anything changed. Drew drove me home. He didn't say much. He made me soup from scratch. He turned the brightness on all our screens down to nothing and put blackout curtains in the bedroom. That night, While I was lying in the dark, my phone lit up. It was my mother. Sabine, I need a favor. Maria's ticket has to be paid by Friday or there's a late fee. Can you e-transfer the $417 tonight? I'll pay you back. She wouldn't. We both knew she wouldn't. In 4 years of lending money to my family, I had been paid back exactly once $40 for a birthday dinner I'd covered. I stared at the ceiling. Drew was in the doorway. He'd heard the notification sound, or maybe he just knew. He leaned against the frame and didn't say anything. She wants the money for the ticket, I said. He nodded slowly. I'm not sending it, I said. He nodded again. I texted my mother back. I can't right now. I just got out of hospital. She replied within 30 seconds. It's just an e-transfer. It takes 2 minutes. I put the phone face down and didn't pick it up again until morning. The following month, I did something I'd been thinking about since the ambulance ride. I changed my emergency contact at work. It had always been my parents, a leftover from when I'd first started, when I was 22 and Drew and I had only been dating for a year. I changed it to Drew. It took about 2 minutes in the HR portal, which, as it turns out, is exactly how long an e-transfer takes. I also, and this one was harder, called my bank and reviewed every automatic transfer I had set up. There were 3 going to my parents. One for $200 a month that had started as help with groceries and never stopped. One for $150 that I'd set up during COVID, when my father's hours were cut and then apparently forgotten to cancel. One for $75 that I genuinely could not remember the origin of. I canceled all 3. Drew sat next to me while I did it. He didn't cheer or say I told you so. He just poured me a coffee and pushed it across the kitchen table. My parents noticed the transfers stopping the same day they would have processed. My mother called. My father called after her. Then Maria called, which was notable because Maria almost never calls. She prefers to communicate through my mother, like a diplomatic intermediary. I let all 3 go to voicemail. Then I called back, once, on a Saturday afternoon and said the same thing to each of them. I love you, but I can't keep doing this. I'm recovering from a head injury. I need to focus on myself right now. My mother said I was being selfish. My father said Drew had always been a bad influence. Maria texted, "So you're just not going to help us anymore?" Cool. Very mature. I screenshot all of it, not for any particular purpose, just because I wanted a record of exactly who these people were when things didn't go their way. Drew's company has an annual employee appreciation dinner. It's held every April at a hotel in the financial district. The kind of event where they do speeches and hand out certificates and serve rubber chicken, and everyone pretends it's meaningful. Drew had been nominated for some kind of internal award for a project he'd led the previous year, which genuinely made me proud. I bought a new dress. I was looking forward to a night that had nothing to do with any of this. My parents were not invited to this dinner. That should be clear. They were not there. What happened was something else. 3 days before the dinner, my mother called me. "Your Aunt Phyllis is in town. She wants to see you. We're all getting together Saturday, the same night as Drew's thing." "I can't do Saturday," I said. "Drew's dinner." "It's just a work dinner." "It's his awards night. I'm going." Long pause. "Fine. I'll tell Phyllis you couldn't make time for her." I went to the dinner. Drew won his award. He got up and said something funny and self-deprecating, and everyone laughed, and I thought, for maybe the 100th time since the hospital, about how lucky I was to have ended up with this specific person. At the table, over dessert, a passable chocolate torte, one of Drew's colleagues leaned across and asked how I'd been. She knew, vaguely, that I'd been in an accident. I said I was doing well. I mentioned the accident, briefly. I mentioned that my parents hadn't come until hours later. She looked startled. "Hours? Why?" And I said, And I didn't plan this, it just came out. My sister had a traffic ticket and was having a hard time with it. My parents felt that was more pressing. A traffic ticket? For $17. Photo radar on the gardener. She stared at me. Anyway, I said, and took a bite of my tortie. Drew looked at me sideways. Not concerned. Something closer to recognizing me. Like a version of me had just shown up that he'd been quietly waiting for. I didn't make a speech. I didn't call my parents at the table. I didn't post anything on social media or send a group text. I just said what happened, plainly, to someone who asked, and let the truth be what it was. That was enough. That was actually enough. The months after were quieter than I expected. I'd braced for a war, the kind of sustained family campaign I'd watched my parents wage against my uncle years ago when he'd crossed them over something I never fully understood. I'd expected calls from relatives, messages from cousins, some kind of coordinated pressure. There was some of that. An aunt texted to say I was tearing the family apart. A cousin called twice in 1 week. My grandmother, my father's mother, a small, formidable woman in her 80s who I have always genuinely loved, sent me a card that said she hoped we could all find our way back to each other. But mostly, after a few weeks, it went quiet. And the quiet was the thing I hadn't anticipated. I'd expected it to feel like loss. Instead, it felt like setting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had weight. I still work at the hospital. I still take the same highway home. I still pass the stretch of the 401 where it happened, and sometimes I look at the shoulder and think about lying there, watching the November sky, listening to my mother ask if I was dying. I'm not. I'm actually doing fine. Drew made me a birthday dinner last month, pasta from scratch, candles, the whole thing. Our daughter. We found out I was pregnant about 2 months after the accident, which was its own complicated miracle. Was not yet showing, but very much present in the sense that I couldn't eat the pasta without getting heartburn. So I ate it in careful small bites, and Drew pretended not to notice and refilled my water glass 4 times. At one point, he looked across the table and said, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "Good. Really good, actually." He smiled. The candles flickered. Somewhere in Mississauga, a traffic ticket had been paid by someone. Probably my mother. Probably with money she didn't have. Probably with some creative resentment about how no one helped her. That wasn't my problem anymore. It hadn't been mine to begin with. I'd just spent 9 years pretending it was. And it took lying on the shoulder of a highway in November, watching a paramedic hold my phone with an expression of quiet disbelief, to finally understand the difference. I think about Trisha a lot, the paramedic who held my phone and then quietly hung it up for me. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. There was a kind of dignity in that small act, the way she just moved on and kept doing her job, kept taking care of me, even after hearing what she'd heard. I've tried to carry that with me, the idea that you can witness something painful and still choose to be decent anyway. What I've come to understand about my own story is that nothing that happened was sudden. It only felt that way from the outside. Every choice I made over 9 years, every transfer, every voicemail I picked up, every time I said yes when I meant no, was a small decision that led to the next one. And every choice my parents and my sister made was the same. Patterns don't appear out of nowhere. They build, slowly, in the space between what people say and what they actually do when it matters. That's not bitterness talking. It's just what I've learned about cause and effect. The way things accumulate, the way a person lying on the shoulder of a highway listening to her mother ask, "Is she dying?" can suddenly see with startling clarity the full shape of something she'd been too close to see before. I'm not angry at who I was during those 9 years. I was doing what I thought love required. But I've learned, and this one took a long time, that real care has to be honest to survive. You can't sustain something built on a version of yourself that you perform instead of live. And eventually, no matter how long you hold it, the gap between who you actually are and who you've been pretending to be closes. It has to. Drew never once told me what to do. He asked questions. He waited. He drove to the hospital before I even got there. And he slept in a chair for 2 nights. And he turned the brightness down on every screen in our house without being asked. That kind of steadiness, that quiet, consistent showing up, is its own form of intelligence. Not the kind you can credential, the kind you build by paying attention to people and meaning it. What I know now is that the strength I thought I was showing by always saying yes was actually something else. It was avoidance dressed up as generosity. Real strength, I think, is the harder thing. Being willing to disappoint someone for the right reasons, and staying upright while you do it. Not crumbling, not going back, not softening the decision because the silence gets uncomfortable. I'm 31 years old. I have a bleed that healed, a husband who shows up, a baby on the way, and a kitchen table where, on a Tuesday night in April, I sat across from Drew and ate pasta with heartburn and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That's not a small thing. That's everything, actually.